Close your eyes for a moment. Try to imagine a world where there never was a dawn, where there never was the first golden ray cutting across the horizon, where there never was that magical moment when the darkness slowly fades, revealing shapes, colors, life. Before the sun rose, before night existed, all was shadow. But it wasn't just the absence of light, it was something much deeper, much more disturbing. It was the absence of hope, the absence of possibility, the absence of dreams. Imagine walking forever down an endless corridor where your footsteps echo in the void, where your hands touch only the cold, damp air, where your eyes strain to see anything, any shape, any movement, and find only nothing. This was how the world existed, a place where people lived, breathed, ate, slept, but didn't truly live. They simply existed, like shadows of themselves, repeating empty gestures, whispering meaningless words, walking in circles along paths that led nowhere. It was as if they had forgotten that there was anything beyond mere survival, as if they had lost the memory of something essential, that spark that makes the difference between existing and truly living. This is Kaya, the storyteller, and prepare your heart, because today's story will touch you in ways you might not have expected. If this beginning touched you, stirred something inside you, leave a like and share it with anyone you feel needs to hear it, because sometimes it's a story that awakens what was dormant. In this immobile world, in this suspended time, where everything remained the same day after day, if we can even call them days, since there was no difference between what would be morning, afternoon, or night, there lived a being who observed everything differently. A raven, small, silent, with feathers as black as the starless sky itself. It flew low, between the animal skin huts and the sharp winds that whistled through the stones. Its wings made a dry, rhythmic sound, like a heartbeat in the absolute silence. Outwardly, he looked no different from the other ravens. But inside, oh, inside, something pulsed. Something moved. It was like a constant uneasiness, a restlessness that wouldn't let him rest completely. A nagging feeling that all of this, all that darkness, all that repetition, all that half-lived life wasn't all there was. Have you ever felt that? That subtle, almost imperceptible discomfort that doesn't let you forget that something inside you still pulsates, that there's still a flame, even if tiny, even if almost extinguished, but that refuses to die completely? The crow felt this every day. When he flew over the villages and saw people walking with hunched shoulders, empty eyes, joylessly performing tasks, he sensed something was terribly wrong. He couldn't explain it in words. After all, crows don't speak like humans. But he felt deep in his heart, in that most intimate part of his soul, that the world wasn't meant to be this way. It was as if he carried an ancestral memory, a distant echo of how things should be. As if somewhere deep within his existence, he knew there were colors, there was warmth, there was a vibrant energy capable of transforming everything. But the other creatures in the village didn't seem to feel this unease. The wolves hunted mechanically, the bears hibernated in their caves, the people went about their daily tasks like automatons. But the raven couldn't resign itself to it. During his long hours of solitary flight, he would hear fragments of conversations, low whispers among the elderly, who sometimes spoke of different times, of stories that seemed to come from another world. And it was thus on one of those eternal afternoons, if we can call afternoons something that had neither beginning nor end, that he heard something that would change everything. An elderly woman, her hair as white as the mountain snow, sat near a low fire that barely warmed her hands. She spoke softly to a child dozing in her arms. Her words cut through the silence like a blade. They say that in faraway lands, beyond the icy mountains, beyond the winds that cut like knives, there exists a light that can transform everything, a light that many say is just fantasy, just the dream of those who have lost their minds. The child murmured something in her sleep, and the old woman continued, her eyes fixed on the dim flames. But I believe because I still remember. I still remember dreams where things had color, where the sky wasn't just darkness, where there was something called hope. The raven landed silently on a nearby branch, his heart, if ravens have hearts as we know them, racing. Those words weren't just words. They were like a key turning in a lock he hadn't even known existed inside. It was as if it wasn't the first time he'd heard it. It was as if somewhere deep in his soul, he'd already known about that light. As if it weren't a discovery, but rather a memory returning. That night, or what was supposed to be a night, since every hour was the same in that eternal darkness, the raven couldn't rest. The old woman's words echoed within him like stones thrown into a still lake, creating ripples that spread throughout his being. A light that can transform everything. He circled low over the sleeping village, watching the rooftops covered in a thin layer of ice, listening to the sharp wind whispering between the buildings. Everything there seemed to accept the darkness as if it were natural, inevitable, but not for him. Not anymore. Do you know that feeling? When something you hear awakens something that was already inside you, waiting. When a piece of information doesn't seem new, but rather familiar. Like it's a part of you that's just been waiting for the right moment to manifest. Without warning anyone, without goodbyes, without elaborate plans, the raven made the bravest decision of his life. He would set out in search of the light. Not because he was certain it existed after all. He had never seen any proof. Not because the path would be easy, on the contrary. He sensed it would be the most difficult journey he had ever faced. But because something inside him, something stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, told him he had to try. At the first dawn that never came, he took flight. He soared higher, higher than he had ever flown before, until the village was nothing but a dark speck below. And then, guided by an intuition even he could not explain, he flew toward the distant mountains. The first few hours were the hardest. The thin air burned his small lungs, and the biting cold penetrated his feathers like icy needles. His wings, accustomed to short, low flights, soon began to ache from the constant exertion. But he kept going. Why did it continue? Because when you find something that resonates with the deepest truth of your being, you can't simply ignore it and go back to your old life. It's like a door has opened within you, and there's no way to close it again. For days, or what would have been days if time had any meaning in that world, he flew over increasingly wild and hostile landscapes. Snow-capped mountains that glowed with a strange pale light, forests of gnarled trees that looked like claws emerging from the frozen ground, deep valleys where the wind howled like wounded creatures. At times, exhaustion overcame him completely. He landed on jagged rocks, his paws numb from the cold, his body shaking uncontrollably. And in those moments of weakness, voices whispered in his mind, "Go back. This is madness. You will die here. No one has ever found this light. Maybe it doesn't even exist." But always, always, when despair threatened to overcome him, he remembered the old woman's words. More than that, he remembered the feeling those words had awakened in him, that silent certainty, that inexplicable conviction that the light was not just a legend, it was a necessity. It was what the world had been waiting for long ago. And so he flew. He flew through storms that ripped the feathers from his body and tossed him like a toy in the furious winds. He crossed forests so dense he could barely find room to move his wings. He crossed icy deserts where nothing grew, where nothing lived, where the silence was so absolute he could hear his own heartbeat. There were times when he almost gave up, times when he landed on some lonely rock and thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just the delusion of someone who can't accept reality. But always, at the exact moment when giving up seemed inevitable, something happened. Sometimes it was a gentler wind that pushed him in the right direction. Sometimes it was a ray of pale light, unlike anything he'd ever known, that cut through the clouds for an instant. Sometimes it was just a feeling, a hunch that he was on the right path, that each wing beat brought him closer to his destination. And so it was, after a journey that seemed to last a lifetime, that he finally saw it, a different light on the horizon. It wasn't bright, it wasn't dramatic, it was just different, as if someone had lit a very small candle in a very distant place. But to the crow, that little light was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his entire existence. With his last remaining strength, he flew toward that light. And as he approached, he began to make out shapes. A small hut, smoke rising from a chimney, and at the door, a human figure that seemed to be waiting for him. It was a shaman, a very old man with long hair and a white beard, wearing fur garments that seemed to carry the wisdom of many winters. His eyes, deep as ancient lakes, met the raven's, and a slow smile spread across his wrinkled face. "I've been waiting for you," the shaman said, his voice like the wind through ancient trees. "It's been a long time since anyone has made this journey. It's been a long time since anyone has dared to seek the light." The raven landed in front of the shaman, its legs trembling with exhaustion, its chest rising and falling rapidly. It couldn't speak. Ravens don't speak like humans, but its eyes said it all. "I have come to seek the light. I have come because the world needs it." The shaman nodded slowly, as if he could read the little traveler's soul. "The light is here," he said, pointing to a small, simple box beside him. "It has slept for so long, waiting for someone brave enough to carry it back to the world." But then the shaman's smile became more serious, more challenging. "But listen carefully, little crow. Carrying the light isn't just about receiving it. It's about accepting the responsibility of carrying it back through the entire journey you've just made. It's about accepting that many won't understand, that many will doubt, that perhaps no one will thank you." The raven didn't hesitate for a second. He inclined his head in a gesture that clearly said, "I accept." The shaman watched the raven for a long moment, his ancient eyes seeming to see through time, through possibilities, through the consequences that decision would bring. Then with slow, ritual movements, he opened the small box. What happened in that moment was indescribable. A golden light, soft yet intense, escaped the box as if it had a life of its own. It wasn't just clarity, it was warmth, it was hope. It was pure life manifesting for the first time in that forgotten world. The air around it seemed to vibrate, the shadows receded, and for an instant the raven saw the world as it could be. Alive, colorful, pulsating with possibility. "This is the primordial light," the shaman whispered, reverence in his voice. "It has slept here for eons, waiting for someone brave enough to return it to the world. But beware, it is more than it seems. It is heavy because it carries all the hope the world has forgotten. It is fragile because it can fade if not protected. And it is transformative because once it touches a heart, that heart will never be the same again." With infinite care, the shaman took a small spark of that light and gently placed it beneath the raven's wings, close to its heart. The sensation was like receiving a warm embrace after years of cold, comforting, yet overwhelming. "Now," the shaman said solemnly, "you must make the journey back, alone, carrying this flame under your wings, never letting it go out. It will be harder than the journey you made to get here, because now you carry not only your own strength, but the responsibility of keeping something alive for the whole world." The raven felt the weight of those words. It wasn't a physical weight. The flame was as light as a feather. It was the weight of responsibility, the weight of knowing that thousands of lives depended on him, not failing, not giving up, not letting discouragement overcome him. "Many will disbelieve you," the shaman continued. They will say you've gone mad, that you're chasing fantasies. Others will fear the change you bring, and there will be times when you even doubt yourself. But remember, the light you carry is not yours. It belongs to the world. You are merely the messenger. And then, with a sad but proud smile, the shaman waved goodbye. Come on, little hero, take the light back home. The raven took flight again, but this time everything was different. The flame beneath its wings radiated a constant heat, like a second heart beating in sync with its own. But it also carried a responsibility it had never felt before. Every wing beat had to be calculated. Every movement had to be considered to protect the precious light it carried. The journey back was, as the shaman had predicted, harder than the outward journey. The cold seemed more cruel, as if the darkness of the world itself were trying to extinguish the light that threatened its eternal domination. The winds blew harder, the storms more violent, and several times the raven had to perch and take shelter, shielding the flame with its own body. But what disturbed him most wasn't the natural elements. It was the voices. Voices that seemed to come from the air itself, whispering doubts in his mind. What's all this for? People were fine before you came along with your ideas for change. You're just a small, insignificant crow. Who are you to think you can change the world? There were times when these voices almost convinced him. Times when he would perch on some lonely rock, gaze at the flame he carried and think, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just a foolish dreamer. Maybe the world is destined to remain in darkness. But always, always, when doubt threatened to overcome him completely, something happened. The flame pulsed brighter, as if responding to his fears. And in those moments, he felt he was not alone. That everyone in the village, even without knowing it, was with him. That all life in the world was rooting for him. And you, who are listening to this story now, have you ever carried something like this? Something you knew was important, something you knew could make a difference, but that felt too heavy for you to carry. Have you ever felt the weight of responsibility of being the bearer of a change that the world needs, but doesn't always want? The raven flew for days that seemed eternal. He crossed once again the dark forests, the icy mountains, the valleys where the wind howled like lost creatures. And with each kilometer, the flame he carried seemed to grow slightly, as if fueled by his determination, by his unwavering faith in a mission greater than himself. During the nights, or what would have been nights in that timeless world, he heard other sounds. They weren't just whispers of doubt anymore. They were like distant echoes of voices saying, "Keep going, we're waiting, we believe in you." He didn't know if they were real or the creation of his own hope, but these whispers of encouragement kept him flying when everything seemed impossible. And so, beat by beat, mile by mile, he approached home. The flame beneath his wings now pulsed with a life of its own, as if it knew it was nearing its destination. The raven sensed it was eager to manifest itself, to show the world what it could become. Finally, after a journey that tested every fiber of his being, that challenged every limit of his endurance, he spotted the village on the horizon. The same huts, the same ice-covered rooftops, the same trails where people walked in meaningless circles. But this time, he didn't arrive empty-handed. This time, he brought with him the possibility of total transformation. He landed on a rock in the center of the village, his heart pounding, not just from the physical exertion, but from the magnitude of the moment he was about to experience. A few people gathered around, curious, but not really understanding what was happening. With a smooth, purposeful movement, the raven spread its wings, and the flame it had protected throughout the journey finally escaped, soaring toward the sky like a golden arrow. And then, for the first time in the history of that world, something happened that no one had ever seen, something that no one had ever even dreamed of. A golden line appeared on the horizon. What happened in those first seconds was indescribable. The golden line on the horizon began to grow slowly, as if testing whether the world was ready to receive it. It was a light unlike anything that could have existed in their imagination, not the pale glow of torches or the weak fires they knew. It was something completely new, warm, vibrant, full of life. The sky, which for ages had been a uniform mass of darkness, began to transform. First, subtle shades of blue appeared at the edges of the horizon, as if someone were painting the world for the first time. Then layers of pink, gold, orange, colors that had no name because they had never existed. The people in the village reacted in starkly different ways. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Others ran into their huts, covering their eyes, terrified by something so unlike anything they knew. Some simply stood there in absolute silence, tears streaming down their faces, unsure why they were crying. And then the sun came out. Imagine trying to describe the color red to someone born blind. Imagine trying to explain the sound of a symphony to someone who had never heard music. It was impossible for those people to fully comprehend what was happening. For the first time in their lives, they saw shadows, not the uniform darkness they knew, but defined shapes created by light. For the first time, they saw textures, depths, details that had always been there, but were invisible in the lightless world. The raven stood motionless on the village's central stone, observing the transformation his journey had made possible. His little heart beat fast, not from exhaustion this time, but from an emotion he hadn't even known existed. Was it pride? Was it relief? Was it love for the world that could finally show its true beauty? A small child, drawn from one of the huts by the commotion, was the first to react, pure and simple. She reached out toward the light, felt the warmth touch her skin for the first time, and giggled with pure joy. That sound, the innocent laughter of a child discovering wonder, cut through the silence and fear like a sharp knife. And it was as if that laughter were a signal. One by one, other people began to emerge from their huts. They began to look around and truly see their homes, their clothes, each other's faces. Many wept as they saw for the first time the faces of those they loved, spouses, children, parents, discovering details, expressions, and beauties they had never noticed. The world revealed itself in all its grandeur. The distant mountains were not merely menacing shadows. They had majestic peaks capped with snow that glittered like crystals. The forests were not merely dark and dangerous masses. They contained trees of various types, some with smooth trunks, some with rough trunks, some tall and elegant, others low and welcoming. But it wasn't just the big things that changed. People began to notice small, wondrous details, the texture of the stones beneath their feet, the shape of the clouds in the sky that now had color and movement, the shimmer of water in streams they'd always known existed, but had never actually seen. And you? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine waking up tomorrow and seeing for the first time the color of your eyes in the mirror, the texture of your skin, the beauty of the faces of the people you love? Can you imagine discovering that the world you knew was only a tiny fraction of what really existed? Some people inevitably resisted the change. They remained in their huts, insisting that the light was dangerous, that it was better when everything was predictable and the same. We were fine before, they grumbled. Why complicate things? Why all this change? But even these, over time, were seduced by the beauty and possibility that the light brought. The crow didn't expect applause. He didn't expect recognition. He didn't expect anyone to say thank you or for a statue to be built in his honor. His mission had never been about him. It had always been about giving back to the world something he had forgotten he possessed. And so, silently, just as he had departed, he flew away from the celebration, away from the cries of wonder, away from the tumult of transformation. He landed in a tall tree on a nearby hill, and from there watched his people discover a new world. But something had changed in him too. Throughout his journey, he had thought he was bringing light to others. Only now did he realize that the true transformation had taken place within him. He was no longer the same raven who had set out in search of light. He was someone who had discovered strengths he had never imagined. He was someone who had learned that the greatest treasures are not earned, but shared. He was someone who had understood that sometimes you have to undertake an impossible journey not to get somewhere, but to discover who you truly are. The light he brought to the world wasn't magic. There were no secret formulas, no supernatural powers. The only thing that had happened was a decision. The decision to believe that something better existed. The decision not to accept that things had to remain as they always were. The decision to embark on a journey, even without guarantees, even without a map, even without knowing if he would reach the end. And maybe that courage, that decision, is just lying dormant inside you right now, waiting for a story to wake it up, waiting for a moment of restlessness to awaken it, waiting for you to say yes to the first step, even without knowing all the steps that will come next, because light never comes from the sky. It always comes from within, from a decision, from courage, from someone ordinary who dares to believe in something extraordinary. And now, looking at you who are listening to this story, I need to tell you something important. Just as the crow heard a story that awakened something dormant inside him, perhaps this legend has touched something that was already inside you, waiting. Perhaps you're living your own time before the light. Perhaps your life has become a repetition of empty gestures, of days that all seem the same, of dreams you've stopped believing are possible. Perhaps you've forgotten that there's something more than mere survival, something more than just completing tasks and waiting for time to pass. But like the raven, you have a choice. You can continue to accept that things are just the way they are, that dreams are for others, that people like me don't matter. Or you can listen to that silent restlessness that still pulses within you, even if small, even if fragile, even if almost extinguished. This restlessness has a name. It's called unrealized potential. It's called dormant purpose. It's called a life not yet fully lived. And just like the raven, you can make the bravest decision of your life. Set out in search of your own light. Not because you're sure where it is, not because the path will be easy, but because something inside you, something stronger than fear, tells you to try. The Forgotten Agreement, the 30-day challenge, is exactly this journey the raven took. It's an invitation for you to step out of your comfortable darkness and seek the light that already exists within you, but lies dormant. It's a map, not to a physical place, but to the truest and most powerful version of who you truly are. Just as the shaman handed the flame to the raven, this book will provide you with practical tools, profound insights, and daily challenges that will gradually awaken this inner light. But beware. Just as the raven discovered, the hardest journey isn't finding the light. It's having the courage to carry it back into your everyday life and let it transform everything. The link is in the video description. And I tell you with all sincerity, if this story touched you, if something stirred inside you while you heard about the courage of a little crow, it's because the time has come for your own journey to begin. But even if you don't have this book, even if you don't take the challenge, the legend of the raven has already planted a seed in you. And seeds, when they find the right soil, always grow. Perhaps today you're in that gray period I mentioned at the beginning. A time when everything seems lifeless, meaningless. A time of profound demotivation, where getting out of bed feels like moving an entire mountain. Where dreams have become distant objects, like stars you no longer believe you can reach. But I want you to remember something this story teaches us. Even a distant star began as an invisible spark. Even the brightest sun began as a small flame that someone dared to protect and carry through the darkness. What if this darkness you're experiencing is just a phase before your own dawn? What if this apathy, this feeling that nothing is worthwhile, is just the space before a spark that will change everything. The raven wasn't born ready. He didn't receive an instruction manual. He had no GPS, no map, no guarantees. He simply listened to the discomfort, that persistent feeling that something inside him still pulsed, still had life, still held infinite possibilities. That's all you need right now. Listen to what pulses, even if it's small, even if it's fragile, even if it doesn't have a defined shape. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need movie hero courage. You just need movement. You just need a first step. You don't need to know exactly where you're going. You just need to say yes to the next step. You just need to accept carrying your little flame for a while, shielding it from the winds of discouragement, feeding it with small acts of daily courage until it grows enough to illuminate not only you, but everything around you. And you know what the most beautiful part of all this is? When you finally unleash your light, when you finally become who you always had the potential to be, you'll discover it wasn't just for you. It was for your world too. For the people who love you and who are waiting to see the truest, most radiant version of who you are. It was about the opportunities that will arise when you're aligned with your purpose. It was about the problems you'll be able to solve, the contributions you'll make, the legacy you'll leave. Just as the raven discovered, the most important journey is not the one that takes you away. It's the one that brings you back home, but as a completely transformed person. Always remember, light never came from the sky. It came from within an ordinary small being who dared to believe in something that didn't yet exist, but who knew deep in their heart that it was possible. And that same light, that same courage, that same transformative force is already within you, just waiting for a decision, just waiting for you to say, I'll try. If this story sparked something inside you, if it reminded you of dreams you'd forgotten, if it awakened that sacred restlessness that tells you you have so much more to offer the world, then do your part. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Because sometimes it all starts with a story. Sometimes it's an ancient legend that ignites what time and circumstance have tried to extinguish. And sometimes it's by hearing about the courage of others that we discover our own dormant courage. And who knows? Who knows your journey in search of your own light might not begin exactly now, exactly here, exactly with this story that came to you at the right time, in the right way, to awaken exactly what needed to be awakened. The light is waiting, the journey is calling, and you already have everything you need to begin.